So you're with your honey, and you're making out when the phone rings. You answer it, and the voice is, "What are you doing with my daughter?" You tell the girl, and she say, "My dad is dead." Then who was phone?
It's such a stupid creepypasta. Like, it's funny every time, but God.
Welcome to this episode of Without Context Podcast, the podcast with no context. We are, the three of us here, are going to be talking about either our favorite creepypastas or creepypastas in general. Just talking about creepypastas. I'm Decavolty. I'm joined by AnxietyLasagna and SharkyHat. And a shark with AnxietyLasagna.
His name's Ike.
Ike, the emotional support shark.
He seems to have...
support shark.
He seems to be a fixture on the Haley side of things during this month.
At least for this month, yeah.
So
we're gonna just go around and talk about either our favorite creepypasta. I just said mine because it's just so stupid. And I've also had it rattling around in my head since about 2008 when it came out. So we'll start with Sharky. Sharky, talk to us about creepypastas in general, but like also your favorite.
Yeah, so this episode is going to cover a few things. Just the general concept of creepypasta if you weren't around during like the heyday of it all, or if you just don't know about it because you're not on the internet as much as we are. I think Haley wanted to talk about some real life things involving creepypastas, and I also wanted to read my favorite creepypasta, which I may do near the end so I don't terrify Haley for this entire thing, because
save it for the end. Terrify her at the end. What's the
worst? Just have me sitting in suspense the entire episode.
Well, because it is one of those that's like, this is a very also like real thing. So.
Oh, shut up! Why do you hate me?
And if you guys hear anything with the audio, I'm live adjusting this as we go because I've been trying to perfect the audio quality as these episodes go on. But so I just have Wikipedia open here just for some finer points. But the way that I understood creepypasta when I first came across them were basically short fiction. Basically made up urban legends for a variety of places. That's all it really is. They're made up myths and urban legends and some basic horror stories. They're not in line with fan fiction, but they definitely are popular enough to spawn fan fiction. A lot of creepypasta stories have become indie games, Slenderman being probably the most popular one out of all of these. And in recent years, you have stuff like Siren Head and everything showing up that are becoming its own games and stuff.
No, don't worry, Haley. I'll ask. What's Siren Head?
I don't want to know.
Siren Head was... There's this guy, I forget his name. I think it's Trevor or something. He draws paintings of weird creatures. And there was one, it's a tall, thin, like very large figure that looks like it has like a siren, like as a head, like a siren horn. Mm-hmm. And it's the whole thing about it I've seen from like games and everything is that it can like blend in with trees. It looks like it stays in mostly like natural areas. So it's more of like a wilderness thing. But that one's one that has come up in the last few years. But that's after I've stopped, kind of following that part of internet culture. I was in deep with like the Slenderman era of things. Slenderman, The Rake, Jeff the Killer, like all that original generation of like creepypasta characters is what I grew up reading a lot of. But yeah, it's just these different takes of folklore and urban legends just kind of made into a new age kind of thing. And like I said, they've spawned games and stuff. So they've just built lore and fiction. I mean, Slenderman got a movie. It wasn't great, but it got an actual like movie release about him. So it's definitely like these sometimes definitely like transcend just internet culture into actual like media. I mean, Marble Hornets was a YouTube channel that really rode like the Slender Man buzz into everything, and I don't even know if they're still going, but they had a ton of episodes out, just kind of like found footage style YouTube show about this weird stuff happening involving Slender Man. And I don't know, just kind of like lost track of what all these things went as I started growing out of them. But even I had at times had like ideas for like a Slender Man like game in like RPG Maker or something. Like I was about to get on that whole hype train with them too. So that's just how popular it was.
Too tall. He's just too tall.
Are you telling me that, probably connected to what Haley wants to talk about later, are you telling me that they wouldn't do anything for a tall, thin, snappily dressed white man? So...
Okay, look, I'm like 5'1", so like to me everybody tall. Slender Man too tall.
He is
like
too tall.
why you gotta be so tall and slender, like looking like a murdering spaghetti noodle in a suit? But yeah, that game was so scary. I remember watching, like, when it first came out, everybody was playing it, like Markiplier and Jack and Pewds and everybody.
The 7 pages, the forest one.
Yep, the 7 pages in the forest, and they'd always die in the freaking bathroom or whatever. And I'm just like, why are you going in there? Because there's always a page. It just...
And just to,
not
like,
for me, dog.
Just to reiterate my point, like, even when they finished playing that game, there was another Slender Man game. And then there was another Slender Man game. And then you had all these games coming out about SCP and everything, which we will do a future video on because I want to talk about SCPs. But you had all the games coming out for that too. So there was like this renaissance like time of just creepypasta games coming out. It was crazy.
And they range from hilarious to scare the pants off AnxietyLasagna.
I mean, that's not a hard thing to do.
That's fair.
Yeah. And I'm looking at the Wikipedia page here, and something that it's obvious about is I think a lot of these probably started, 2014, 2015 is when stuff started really like popping up.
I would say a little bit earlier.
A little bit earlier?
I was in early
Maybe.
college when creepypastas were like a big thing, so I'd say between 2010 and 2014 was probably when it was starting to hit big.
I feel like the peak is in 2012. Like it just was like the whole end of the world thing. Fuck it, all these cryptids happening. No.
Yeah. So where is scroll down here? Yeah, I mean, because Slender Man was 2009 when the first thing like came out from him on Something Awful. So yeah, definitely probably between 2010 2012.
2014, I know, is when I think Slender Man specifically kind of had like a cultural reckoning. Because what I want to talk about occurred in the year of our Lord, 2014.
Yeah, and some of the stuff is just like, this is just like the latest version of, you know, like folklore and urban legends. Because if you think about it, like the story of the game Polybus, which is supposed to be like this Tetris or this Tempest style like shooter like Deca talked about in the past. It was supposed to be a game that came out to some arcades in the 80s and then disappeared because playing it like made you have seizures or like messed with your mind, and people were like, oh, it was a government project. So it's like that was like one of the things that spawned from the internet coming out. It's like, hey, I'm gonna make this new urban legend about this game.
Ooh,
and
good one.
I think that the internet really helps these things, because it's like if we didn't have the internet, it would just be like the local legends. Like it would be me talking to other friends because I wouldn't know you guys. Just be like, hey, you guys hear about, you know, what went down on Elbow Road? You know, it's just like, but now here it's just
absolutely not.
So it's just like all this other stuff. It's just a place for people to create new myths, new urban legends, new folklore in some way, and it's a collaborative effort because Jeremy could write a story about something and then I can take it and build upon it, and then it just spirals out from there as this whole new work of fiction. But yeah, see what Deca wants to talk about.
I watched we were talking, you kind of mentioned it a little bit when you were talking about creepypastas giving way to like found footage stuff after like the Blair Witch and stuff. I actually watched because I couldn't sleep last night because those of you who are listening on your non-video sources, I have chronic pain, and sometimes I look like shit, and that's why. But sometimes I just can't sleep at night, so I randomly just popped in and watched a found footage film that was just on at 3 a.m.
Yeah, I think I saw that. It was like 4 a.m. You're like, I'm up watching found footage films.
I watched Noroi the Curse.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it's good.
It's Japanese found footage, which is rare.
Yes. It is very much a work of fiction, and you can tell by looking at it. But also, it does, like, while you're watching it, when you're in the moment watching it and going over it, you're like, huh, maybe this is real. But at the end of it, it's very much so like a work of fiction. So
yeah,
it was good.
Just enough to know it's like this isn't a thing, but it's like still sincere about itself to make it feel like it's a real thing going on. And that's I think what a lot of creepypastas have. A lot of the more like developed ones feel like they're sincere enough to be a thing. So, but
that's actually. Oh, go ahead, Deca.
Okay. So in I believe it was like the late 80s, Judas Priest had a song that got them into some legal hot water. This is like one of the starting points of like the parental guidance little sticker on your CDs, because there was a song that they had that I cannot remember off the top of my head, but the judge made Rob Halford, the singer for Judas Priest, sing it in court, because he thought that in like there's like the chorus is like he's singing and then there's a breath, and people think that breath is him saying, "Do it."
So, is it called Better by You, Better Than Me?
Better by You, Better Than Me, yes.
I was just looking
I googled controversial Judas Priest song.
Yes.
Yeah,
it goes, "Better by You, Better Than Me," and then he breathes, and people think he's saying, "Do it."
Yeah, looking at the wiki page, in 1990, a 1987 cover version by heavy metal band Judas Priest was the subject of a much-publicized subliminal message trial. The lawsuit alleged that the band's recording contained hidden messages, which were responsible for influencing a pair of young men in Sparks, Nevada, to make a suicide pact in 1985. The case was eventually dismissed.
Yes. So what I was going to get out of that is, if that happened in like the 2010s, that shit would be a creepypasta.
Yeah.
Or an SCP.
This is a really good sort of transition to what I was talking about, because you had like a real life sort of court case based on apparent like people taking a song a little too seriously. And then it also ties into what Sharky was talking about with Slender Man. Are either of you familiar with the Slender Man stabbing?
Yes.
No,
because last podcast on the left did an episode about it. So
I will not be as good as last podcast on the left, but hopefully I'll teach Deca a thing.
Yeah.
So back in 2014, two 12-year-old girls from Wisconsin attempted to murder their friend, who I think was either 12 or 13 at the time. They lured her, like premeditated, lured her into a forest, stabbed her 19 times. She survived, thankfully. She survived, but they did it in order to appease Slender Man. I don't know. I think it was, I don't want to like get too into the legal sauce of it, but the two girls were tried as adults, even though by the time the trial was happening, they were probably between like 13 and 14 years old.
Wisconsin.
They got nothing better to do than have cheese and stab people.
But they the verdict was not guilty by reason of insanity because one of the girls was later diagnosed with schizophrenia, and the other was just the two of them together just sort of fed into each other's delusions, and it ended up being where they were like, let's kill our friend to appease Slenderman, because they were so deep into the like creepypasta sauce that they creepypasta sauce that they thought that if they didn't commit a crime of that magnitude, that Slenderman was going to harm them and their family based on the things that they had read online. So that was sort of between the game and this court case was sort of my introduction into the creepypasta genre, because when people first started talking about it, I was like, oh, are people doing like creepypasta recipes? And they're like, no, Haley, there's scary stories on the internet. And I went, hard pass. Bye, none of that for me, thanks. But yeah, this sort of brought the creepypasta genre and specifically Slenderman into mainstream American media, which, you know, always tends to go well when it's like a niche nerd culture. So I remember like specifically how ridiculous it was. Like I was in college and my mom like sat me down and she's like, do you know about Slenderman? And I'm like, the made up story on the internet? Yes, I am familiar with the lanky boy. But yeah, one of the girls is out. She spent 7 years in a mental health institution, and the other girl is sentenced. She's in there for 40 years to life in that institution as a result of that attack.
I think the one who just went along with it was the one that got out earlier, but the one who's like was the driving force behind the two of them is the one that's still sitting in an institute somewhere.
The one that was only released last month, so that's relatively recent case. In the aftermath of the case, obviously, like the creepypasta wiki page was blocked in that school district. Slenderman creator Eric Knudsen made an official statement saying, quote, I'm deeply saddened by the tragedy in Wisconsin, and my heart goes out to the families of those affected by this terrible act. The creepypasta community did a 24-hour live stream to raise money for the victim. The SCP Foundation had to issue a statement being like, we are not a real thing, but we'll talk more about
real.
SCPs.
Please stop that.
Yeah, so, and it led obviously into a really public debate on the effect of like chronic internet use on children, because like, I think it's not any stretch of the imagination that creepypastas aren't really aimed at a child audience.
No.
So
Impressionable.
Anytime something like this happens, it's always like, it's those dang video games, or it's them dang Dungeons and Dragons, or Magic the Gathering.
Panic.
Bro, I want to do a full like satanic panic, like D&D deep dive, like
yes,
because I am such a non-well-adjusted human being, and D&D is the only thing keeping me sane. So
me too.
But yeah, there was a documentary by HBO that was released about the case. There was an episode of Law & Order SVU about it, where instead of calling Slender Man, it was called Glasgow Man, which I think is even stupider. Criminal Minds had an episode that was about it. In 2018, a movie inspired by the case called Terror in the Woods was aired on Lifetime. So there's a movie you could watch, Sharky, if you want to watch a Lifetime scary movie.
God.
You're snuggled up with your honey and you want to watch a horror movie, but only Lifetime. Lifetime's the only channel you got.
But whose phone? But if it sweetens the pot for anybody, Christina Ricci was the executive producer, our very own Wednesday Addams. So, and then finally there was another movie inspired by it called Mercy Black that was released on Netflix with no prior announcement. So if you'd rather see a spookier one, it's on Netflix.
Yeah, and I want to kind of take this where it's like Slenderman, I think to me, and my love for like the paranormal and just like the weird of the world is probably the first creepypasta to actually become like into cryptid territory because the concept of Slender Man and its fiction has affected reality to that point now. And it's like,
well, it's in media, right? It's in like other media besides like the court dramas. There's like video games and stuff, like you said.
But it's like, you don't see like publicized stuff. It's about like Jeff the Killer or Smile.jpg or Ben Drowned.
Wait, I know about Smile.jpg.
that dog still creeps me out.
I have never looked at it because I'm AnxietyLasagna and I'm a self-diagnosed little bitch baby.
The point is, like, Slenderman is the first creepypasta to actually like affect the real world in a way, which to me kind of in a way like puts it into Tulpa territory, which if you're not familiar with the paranormal, Tulpa is something that is conjured purely from the mind of a collective.
Yep.
So it's like these kids are like, hey, we've seen him, we've did this thing for him, like it was something that they saw and affected them in the real world at that point. So it's just like, sure, it's probably impressionable kids, but it's just crazy.
It's like Metal Gear Solid in the memes.
Yeah, so it's just like, this is the first creepypasta to do that. So it's like, it just shows the power of, like, I guess just folklore and belief, and maybe to mentally unbalanced children. So
yeah, I mean, when I used to work at a nature center, and when we would have like large groups of kids who didn't always have the opportunity to interface with natural spaces, the top three things they would ask us if we had were bears, the Jeepers Creepers guy, which I was like, first of all, y'all are too little to know who that man is, and three, they'd be like, has there been any, like, has Slender Man been in here? And I was like, first of all, hate to burst y'all's bubbles, but Slender Man is not real. But he is most definitely not at our wonderful and safe nature center.
Oh, God, I can't. I used to love the Jeepers Creepers movies, just like for that like fringe horror franchise. But it's like, I just can't anymore after finding out like the director is like a convicted like pedophile and everything. And he's admitted that the creature is pretty much based on his desires, like as a weight. So I was like, well, this movie is ruined for me at this point.
Hate
so yeah, and I was like, that's why the YouTube channel Dead Meat, whenever they do like their kill counts, people keep asking, it's like, hey, when are you going to do Jeepers Creepers? And he's just, I'm not. Like,
no, absolutely.
It's like,
this is the first and last time we're going to mention Jeepers Creepers on this podcast.
Yeah, it's just like there's usually
the second I talked about it on the scary movie episode.
That's fair. Yeah.
But it's like, usually you can separate the like creator from art in a lot of places, but not with somebody who's admitted that the creation is his way of trying to deal with himself.
Also
So
Lovecraft.
Yeah, I mean, Lovecraft gave a lot for cosmic horror, but yeah, he was incredibly racist in a time where other racists were like, you need to chill out.
You need to chill, my guy.
Other racists were like, whoa, like the Christopher Columbus of his time.
Oh God, just I went into GameStop over the weekend because I had to get a new controller, and I'm listening to the two clerks who are way too happy to be working at GameStop. I worked at GameStop. You should not be that happy to work at GameStop. But it's like, hey, you ever read anything from Henry Philip Lovecraft? And I was just like,
first of all,
I'm like,
you're calling him Henry?
Yeah, they called him Henry Philip Lovecraft, and it's like, yeah, nobody named his cat. And I was like, I'm just going to ring up this controller and be out of here. You two are way too happy, and you're wrong. So you don't know books.
One of my absolute favorite undergraduate college professor was, I don't know if he's still involved in it heavily, but I think he was like the president of the Rhode Island chapter of like the Lovecraft Society, and has like a Lovecraft themed store in Providence, Rhode Island. If you're in Providence, Rhode Island, you should check it out. It's a really cool store.
I do want to. I do want to like go there and see it. Like I can separate the work from the writer. He did a lot.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have a lot of stuff without him, like laying the groundwork.
When we would talk to him about it, when we would talk to him about Lovecraft, he's like, let me preface by saying Lovecraft is a shitlord and we hate him. His work, the person, trash. But shout out Niels.
The Call of Cthulhu by this doesn't have an author attached to it. So.
Call of Cthulhu by
Hatsune Miku.
Well, no, Hatsune Miku.
You heard it here on this podcast. We're going to start replacing H.P. Lovecraft on all of his work with Hatsune Miku.
Oh my god.
Creator of Minecraft.
Yeah, Hatsune Miku. The creator of Minecraft. Creator
Instead of the Jeepers Creepers monster, it's just Hatsune Miku.
That's the thing. Take whatever problematic person you want, just replace them with Hatsune Miku. That's it.
There you go.
Ender's Game by Hatsune Miku.
There you go.
We got really off topic from creepypastas anyway. So.
Hey man.
Actually, fuck. I did have a question for you, you, Dallas, as sure. You are the person who is the aficionado out of the three of us.
I vaguely have a Wikipedia page open.
I mean, you've read a creepypasta. That's more than me.
I read a few, yeah.
There was. How do you feel about how do you feel about like when things go into the collective consciousness, when creepypastas become that big where they go into the collective consciousness? And then I have a question for both of you after you answer that.
So I like the idea of smaller things on the internet becoming more mainstream, especially if they're good. Mm-hmm. But I would like it if they also knew who created it first, to at least give them some credit. Because let's say I read a creepypasta and I decide I'm just not gonna put my name on it. I'm just gonna post it somewhere. And that thing blows up to become like a major thing. And there's no way to trace it back to the source. So somebody else is like, I made it. So
I made this.
I appreciate it. I like it if they get big with credit. Mm-hmm. Like Slenderman, Victor Surge, Eric Knudsen, whatever his name is. I think his screen name is Victor Surge. But I know that he is involved with a lot of Slenderman media going forward. Like he's either consulted or he's paid to use it, because I think he does own the rights to his character.
Love that.
So like that's cool for him. But if it's like some Joe Schmo posting a story that blows up, then it sucks, and I would hope that they at least try to seek out the original. But if it's more creative ideas, if it's more like originality instead of just repeated like stuff, I'm happy with that.
I feel like we're about to get into Haley's into expertise here.
No.
Okay, continue.
I had one of my like unhelpful thoughts. Would My Immortal count as like an anonymous creepypasta? Ebony, Raven, Dementia, Darkness, Ray, a creepypasta?
This is where the crossover happens from the fanfic episode.
Yep.
Hear me out. She has been brought to life by the collective consciousness and has influenced media. No one knows where she came from. She's kind of a cryptid. I vote that My Immortal and Ebony, Raven, Dementia, Darkness, Ravenway, or whatever is a creepypasta. I
wouldn't say it's a creepypasta on those merits.
It's too much effort to be a creepypasta.
That, and also I think it's going along with the memes. It is a meme. Yes, absolutely.
I've decided it's my own favorite creepypasta. If anyone ever is like, Haley, what's your favorite creepypasta? I'm gonna say My Immortal. By Hatsune Miku. I'm sorry, I totally derailed. You had a second question, Deca?
I did actually. Did you guys, when you were kids, did you ever look in a mirror and say something 5 times?
Yeah.
No, dog.
Those were the analog creepypastas.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. But my point is, I'm in Texas. You're somewhere else. You're in Redacted. Like you guys did these, or people who did them. Just like a lot of us did it for some reason.
What was yours? What did you say?
Mine was Bloody Mary.
Yeah, mine was
Yeah,
Bloody Mary.
same.
So,
I've heard recently that they're trying to like revisionist history this into someone named Candyman, and I'm like, no. You had to say Bloody Mary, and then the old and timey Queen of England would come into your mirror like she had nothing better to do and kill you.
well, Candyman Candyman started after the movie came out, which I think
Yeah, that was a movie
Candyman.
first.
Actually, Candyman's a good transition point because that's sort of like that
It
would
went
be
the other way.
that went the other way. It was the urban legend of that movie that brought the Candyman to a physical like thing. So,
I know this is against the spirit of our podcast, but I'm gonna need a little context. What is Candyman?
Candyman's a horror movie. I think from
It's that new one, right?
they remade it. I think it's an
remake,
early '90s one. It gave
Roger
us
Dodger.
It's probably Tony Todd's best role, and I love that man. He's awesome. But yeah, it was like an inner city like drama movie where they're a woman is like researching inner city like folklore, basically like rumors and urban legends, and it's like in a housing project, and it brings her upon this entity known as the Candyman, who was a slave. I think, if I remember correctly, he fell in love with a white woman, so they caught him, tortured him, killed him, replaced his hand with a hook. But as she starts to believe in him more, he actually starts to become more of a physical entity. So it's kind of like the Slenderman thing, where it's like enough belief in something brings it to like reality. Kind of, and I mean that works a lot of ways. Like, you ever have like an idea or something, and it's like some ways down the line, like that same idea like happens somewhere, like either a movie or a book comes out, and you're like, this was the idea I thought of. Like,
yeah,
that collective unconscious that we all have is like something in there like brings all this stuff to reality at some point.
It's the hive mind. We're all
It's the hive mind.
attached to it by X. Like the thinnest of strands connects all of us together.
Interesting.
6 degrees of
like
Kevin Bacon.
Yep. We're only scratching like the surface of like the weird shit I believe in. So, but
Collective unconscious hive minds.
But yeah, in a sense, Candyman's a creepypasta, just without a digital thing. Because like I said, it's urban legend, it's folklore.
It went the other way. It was a film first, and then it became, because I do remember that people would say Candyman in elementary school. After
there were people that did Candyman
after the movie came out.
After the movie came out, it took that turn because it's like, oh, we know Candyman. We have an image of Candyman. We know what we're talking
in first grade
about.
Doing that. We were well adjusted.
So like, if we're extrapolating like analog creepypastas, would that be things like the Goat Man and that Goat Man bridge, or like the Bunny Man with the Bunny Man bridge?
Yeah, just
okay.
Any classic folklore, I believe, could fall into a realm of
Analog.
Because I mean,
analog creepypasta.
I'm looking at the thing here. I'm looking at the wiki page.
If you really think about it, like,
creepypastas are horror-related legends that have been shared around the internet. If you remove around the internet, horror-related legends that have been shared.
Is Momo a creepypasta?
Of Missouri?
Do y'all remember Momo? Was that a thing you guys were aware of?
Absolutely. That really fucked up hyper-realistic face. Yeah.
I had to explain that to my sister recently, because she has 3 small children, 2 of which are in elementary school, and she's like, one of my kids came home talking about Momo, and I am my family's resident internet connoisseur, so I immediately like made eyes with my oldest niece and was like, you keep those bad vibes out of this establishment. So that I had to be like, I had to explain a creepypasta to my 30-some-year-old sister.
Yeah,
my good Christian woman sister.
The Momo challenge was a hoax and an internet urban legend rumored to spread through social media.
It's
just a really fucked up jump scare.
It's just this really weird photoshopped picture of a child or whatever.
No, it's actually
scarier real children.
No, it's actually a sculpture. It's actually a sculpture that a woman made for like an art exhibit. But it's like, I don't know what that art exhibit's for, but it's an actual like sculpted thing, and like the woman was like, I don't know why it's being used like this. Like,
good soup.
good soup.
All right.
But like some of these creepypastas, like even if you haven't read them, you probably know what they are. Like Slenderman, you probably know who Slenderman is if you spend any time on the internet. The Russian sleep experiment. Even if you've never read that, you've at least heard about it.
People think that's real.
I don't think I've actually seen that one.
Smile Dog. Haley knew that one.
Don't do the Russian sleep experiment, Deca. Don't do it. Have you guys seen the one where it was like abandoned at Disney? Is that one that you guys know of, or is that just because like
that's number 2 on
I was around
list
a bunch of Disney adults?
Yeah, did it Disney?
Yeah, like this was like an urban legend that people would tell about Disney, because like a bunch of people where I grew up had like season passes to go to Disney World, even though it was like all the way in frickin' Florida. But it was apparently there was like some like a room of abandoned animatronics. Yes. But they were like they goofed. They yucked it up and made the animatronics like sentient or like too realistic. And when the guy or whomever the narrator was like went into the room of like the weird animatronics, some stories would say that they like almost killed him. Some people say that they like dismembered him and like someone else came upon his body and like pieced this together based on like the state of the scene. Another version that I was told was like the guy saw the animatronic like rip its own head off and he was like,
I think that's the more common one, because I'm looking at the list of creepypastas here. Banned by Disney.
Five Nights at Freddy's?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I feel like that's probably what Five Nights at Freddy's was inspired by, maybe. I don't know.
The story's climax comes when a man finds a room marked Character Prep 1, which is inhabited by photo-negative mascots that seem to be alive, and flees when he witnesses one rip off its own head. So.
Yeah.
But,
Did y'all hear that thump? Hold on a second.
Did you hear a weird sound?
Yeah, it was my fiance bumping around.
Okay.
He's home from work, and I just heard like the... And I was just like...
Your hackles are raised now that we're talking about creepypastas.
And I open the door, I'm like, hello? And he's just like in the hallway like...
Yeah, like other creepypastas that people probably know without ever having read it. Like you've probably seen the concept of like the back rooms. Like just the or not, and I'm the only one that seen that. It's just a
I'm gonna need a little context.
I'm gonna post a picture in the Discord, and I'm gonna see if it like rings any bells. All so right. Let me do this.
I'd love being spook. Oh, like liminal spaces? Yeah, yes. I've seen that picture before.
Yeah, so it's just like it's like you just go through a room and you find yourself in this like weird like liminal space with something crawling around in it. So.
Oh, gross. Hey, I've experienced like the concept of a liminal space, like when you're walking through like a metro tunnel at night and no one else is there and you feel like you're the only person that's ever existed. But nothing's been crawling around besides like a rat.
I've walked through like office. I've walked through like office buildings like at night and everything, so it's like I've had that same like feeling.
I've worked overnight at Walmart.
But
Rip.
Then you also have like the videos. It's like, oh, the bootleg SpongeBob episode where Squidward kills himself, or the Mickey Mouse video where he commits suicide. It's like
the SpongeBob made Squidward suicide canon.
It did. I know that in a recent episode they did make a reference to that creepypasta.
Yeah.
So it's canon now. Like the creators were like, embrace it. So
yeah.
Man, Steve's not even cold in his grave.
But then you have like
he was alive.
But then you also have like the Lavender Town, like Pokemon creepypasta, where it's like hearing the Lavender Town music would like make you sick and everything. So it's like it's not just one form of media. It's like this is something that also can take a bunch of different like forms, because I think digital media really like opens up like a lot of possibilities. I mean, there's a YouTube channel called Local 58, which has a bunch of like weird like news things going on. It is like public service announcements and stuff with all this like weird shit happening, and just it's cool. Like I just think that's like a really cool form of like creating new folklore.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting way that sort of illustrates how we have evolved as a species to like globalization, because we're more able to be in contact with other people from other cultures in a way that hasn't been as accessible in the past. So our folklore has to sort of rise to that occasion. And now we have these sort of ubiquitous characters and these universal experiences that transcend location and culture. Yeah.
Yeah, because you think back hundreds of years ago, it was like vampires, werewolves, ghosts, demons, like all these other things that were like folklore, or in like Native American terms, like the Wendigo or Sasquatch. So it's like just weird cryptid, like weird creatures. And now it's like in a digital age, it's like, here's a supernatural photo of a smiling dog. Like,
the wildest thing is that if you look at different cultures, like if you look at European cultures, if you look at like Native American cultures, if you look at like African cultures, they all have a version of a vampire or a werewolf, and they even predate colonization.
Yeah, it's like it's just three off the
shit.
Yeah, it's just like that's like I said, the collective unconscious of humanity. How can a Native American culture have like a skinwalker without knowing anything about European werewolves? And along that, how can like Japanese mythology have like the kitsune who can turn into a fox and also a person? So it's like all these like little things kind of connecting all of us without us knowing.
We're not so different after all.
We really aren't. And I want to go into that for a rant for a moment, because like the me mentioning like did you or do you know anybody who looked in a mirror and said the magic word 5 times? That was something we all did. The fucking S.
And I think like nobody knows where that S came from.
Exactly.
It's a creepypasta.
It's the concept of like the I hate saying it because in the contemporary sense it means something different, but like memes. It is something that memes have been a thing for years upon years upon yes.
The S means, you're gonna have to tell me in the chat what that S means that's different now.
We don't know.
Like the 6 lines S?
Yeah, it's 6 lines S.
You're gonna have to message. You have to DM me that. I don't wanna spread the icky on the podcast. You'll have to DM me.
It's not really icky. It's just a meme that everybody did in grade school.
Oh, I thought you meant like I was sitting here over here being like, did the neo-Nazis freaking take something else from us?
No, it's like the exact origin. It's called the cool S. As cool. Officially what Wikipedia calls it is the cool S. It's a graffiti sign in popular culture that is typically doodled in children's notebooks or graffitied on walls. The exact origin is unknown, but it may have originated from.
I'm sorry, I derailed.
No, like this like ties into it all, because it's like even now it's like we don't know where this thing came from, and some of it has even been going back to like the 70s.
Yes,
it wasn't just like a 90s thing.
My parents told me that they did the S. Because they went to school around the 70s. Like that thing's been around, and like the person who did it is the person who came up with it is probably long dead.
Probably. I mean, the origin's unclear. In the 70s, a photographer took a photo in LA, which had an 8 in a similar style, but they also had a very faded cool S as graffiti on a pavement. So it's just like.
Someone should make a creepypasta about it.
It probably is a creepypasta. But like, this is just like the collective unconscious and things that happen in one side of the town, even though like it was much harder for all of us to communicate back then with each other, because I didn't know any of you guys when I was growing up. Like that, we all still have those same shared experiences, and people in other countries, I would be willing to wager, have their own shared experiences. And now, with the age of the internet, they can all come together and be one fucked up experience together.
So further down on this article about the cool S, apparently a Swedish YouTuber studied it for 5 years and attempted to find the origin. And he concluded that an 1890 mechanical graphics book, which was written by Professor Frederick Newton Wilson, could likely be the origin. He taught geometry at Princeton University in New Jersey, where he could have shown students how to draw it.
God.
Imagine
but that's still uncertain though. That's a maybe.
Imagine going to like one of the most prestigious colleges in the country, and they just fucking draw the cool S.
Just drawing 14 lines to make an S.
As an academic,
yes,
totally on brand.
Also,
Totally on brand. What happens in academia? 100% on brand.
Also, of course, it'd be fucking New Jersey.
Of course, it'd be New Jersey.
Everything's legal in Jersey.
Everything's. All right, Sharky.
Is it story time?
It's story time.
I've tried to stall as long as possible, but I feel like we're veering too hard off of the theme.
I think by the time I finish the second paragraph, you guys will know which story this is.
I doubt it extremely.
Okay.
I doubt it.
Story time.
I hate it already.
My great-grandmother lived alone up in the mountains at her cabin. Her husband was dead, so she was there all alone. She only had one companion, and that was her loving dog. They both adored each other, and the dog was a great comfort to her. Every night when she went to bed, the dog would lick her hand to let her know that she was there to protect her. See, I told you.
We had a different variant of this story.
Yeah, there's a bunch of variants on this story.
Go ahead, keep going, I'm sorry.
One night she had gone to bed and the dog had licked her hand like he had done routinely every night since her husband died. But this night was different. She had woken up in the middle of the night because she heard her dog whimpering. She wanted to comfort him and let her know she was there for him. So she stuck her hand out by the bed and felt the dog gently lick her hand like always. She figured he was just cold, so she went back to sleep. The dog's whimpering had woken her up a second time in the night, so she stuck her hand out. The dog licked it, and she went back to sleep. This happened a third time, and she stuck her hand out, and the dog stopped whimpering and came and licked her hand. She stayed awake for a few moments afterwards, and she went back to sleep again. In the morning, she woke up and stuck her hand out by the bed, but nothing licked her hand. She thought that the dog had already awakened and was just in the front room. She rolled over and got out of bed and heard a drip. Drip, drip, drip. She thought the sound was coming from the kitchen, so she walked over and turned the handles on the sink faucet, but it wasn't the source of the noise. After frustratingly checking the sink and its pipes, she gave up and continued to her bedroom to take a shower. As she got closer to the bathroom door, it was evident that the sound was coming from within. She opened the door, looked above the bathtub, and gasped in utter horror. There, hanging from a light by his collar, was her loving companion. His blood was dripping into the bathtub. She screamed and began to cry, wiping her eyes and sobbing. She turned and looked into the mirror. In the mirror, she saw the dog's reflection, and written on the mirror in her dog's blood, with drips and shrieks hanging down from each letter, were the words, "Humans can lick too."
See, the version I heard growing up was babysitting.
Yes.
She was like staying overnight to babysit and heard the dripping and couldn't figure out the source, and like the power was out, so she would just put her hand down so the dog would come for her, and it was in the middle of the night that she found it, and they're like, and she was never seen again. And I'm like, great, love it.
But
you went easy on me, Sharky, and I appreciate you.
That also alone just points out this is just more folklore. This is the same kind of thing as the hitchhiker urban legends, where it's like a dead girl or a hitchhiker or a young kid who's hitchhiking along the road.
Car door.
Yes, so it's just this is the same concept pretty much.
Then who was phone?
Then who was phone?
Phone.
It was a telemarketer calling me about my car's extended warranty.
God. And I think with that, we will bring this episode to a close for Haley Sanity.
I hope everybody enjoyed creepypastas and folklore.
Yeah, and we even got into some deeper conversations about collective unconscious and stuff like that. It's just fascinating.
Like I said, like that's just the surface of like the weird stuff that I enjoy.
And there was like some merit to it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of related. It's like just the idea that different cultures and different places before widespread communication can all have the same kind of like local urban legends or local cryptids or creatures. It just shows that like there's something more going on at the end of the day.
If you think about it, religion is just its own folklore that everyone has a different version of.
Let's not get too deep into that.
But I will just leave you on that. Maybe one day we'll hit open that can of worms. Slowly.
It's just fan fiction of somebody.
Anyway!
All right.
So if you have your own favorite creepypastas that you want to share, maybe if they have something a little weird about them, you want to put like a content warning on them. Just put CW, this and that.
Yeah,
but you can put them in the comments.
Message.
Yeah. And give it a few spaces. But then, yeah, you can post them in the comments. We'll read them. If I will personally rate every creepypasta out of 10 for every one that you post. So get to it. I will read them.
I will not look at any of these comment sections.
I will rate them. I will rate them for how good I think they are. Sharky's is an 8.
That's just a classic one. Like that's
it is.
It's just it's so classic and it's so simple, which I think is like the scariest thing about it too.
And for those of you who are want to know more or to connect with us further, we all have our links down below that you can interact with us in. I highly suggest that all my other co-hosts get another flow page because holy shit, that is useful. I have been Decavolty. AnxietyLasagna has been with me, and so has SharkyHat. And this is Without Podcast. Everybody wave.
This is Without Context Podcast.
Without Context Podcast.
You
no
said
podcast. We have no podcast. Bye.
Just as his own creepypasta, there was no podcast.
Who was podcast?